talking about that Volkswagen. Mm-hmm. He said he used to race it over there, and so that was before we had a dealer here in Decatur. And the transmission started getting noisy. So in order to get it to a dealer, we had to take it to Champaign and rented a lowboy. He drove this Volkswagen up on the trailer, you know. And I said, Mike, why did you run that thing on straight? I said, why did you get it cockeyed like that? He said, no problem, Dad. He went back and got the back end and lifted it over. The engine end, where the engine was, just picked it up and set it over. I thought, boy, it's time for me to shut up now.
What was it about? Why did we go? Don't ask me, I do not know. What was it about? That Asian war? Congressman, I'm asking, don't you close your door? Why is my brother still in that land? Is he a prisoner? Is he a dead man? What was it about? Why did we go? Don't ask me, I do not know. Was it for money? Was it for land? A compromise I don't understand. You ever seen the mother of an MIA with tears in her eyes, on her knees she'll pray? What was it about? Why did we go? Don't ask me, I do not know. Congressman, I'm asking, what are your plans to bring us all home from Vietnam?
Located halfway between Chicago and St. Louis, the city of Decatur, Illinois, and the small towns surrounding it number just over 100,000 people. Quintessentially Midwestern, the rural landscape surrounding Decatur fuels its largest industries. Agribusiness giant Archer Daniels Midland, along with Tate & Lyle, maintain sprawling complexes which are visible from across the region. This blue-collar community has struggled, like so many others, with the challenges of the new global economy. For the last 3 decades, there's been a steady erosion of Decatur's industrial base. Heavy equipment maker Caterpillar maintains a tenuous presence as the city's 3rd largest employer. The history of Decatur is inextricably tied to the rise and fall of these industries, but their presence here has influenced more than just the price of soybeans and the roots of a certain professional football team. A half-century ago, the young men of Decatur, like millions of others from similar working-class communities, volunteered out of high school or were drafted out of the factories to form the backbone of America's military involvement in Vietnam. No other city of similar size in Illinois paid as high a price as Decatur. Well over 40 servicemen with direct ties to the city died on the battlefields of Southeast Asia. This is a story about the Vietnam War within the microcosm of an American city, a community that embodied the pride and patriotism of the post-World War II era, as well as the frustrated anxieties of the silent majority. A study in impact and legacy, it is both a reflection of those who lived through it and the memories of those left behind.
There is a difference deep inside Decatur. From a distance, it looks like any other American town. It could be your town.
First of all, I'd wanted to fly since I was 7 or 8 years old, I had an uncle that was in the Air Force in the Pacific in World War II. He used to send me pictures of the aircraft with the nose art on them, and I used to draw the airplanes and build model airplanes.
Yeah, nearly every window would have the blue star when you got one in service and the gold star when he's no longer in service. So.
Well, for most of the men who went to Vietnam, the legacy of World War II was very powerful and really sort of hard to exaggerate.
My dad fought in World War II, was on the 17th wave of the Normandy invasion.
The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, so he was in for the duration of the war. He was involved in Anahuac, Saipan, and the Okinawa invasions.
World War II, he was a Seabee. Saipan, Tinian, in that area.
I had an uncle that was in the Death March on Bataan.
He was on a ship in the North Atlantic.
He was a Marine, wounded on Iwo Jima.
He was a forward observer in the infantry in Okinawa. He's Purple Heart, he was wounded.
He was an enlisted man, and he was in Army intelligence, but he was part of the Army Air Corps.
Dad was a farmer until he went in the Army in the South Pacific.
My stepdad, Phil, he was an aerial photographer in a B-24 bomber in the Philippines.
Basically, I think Decatur was full of World War II and Korean veterans, our dads and our uncles.
Well, I was still in grade school when it ended. It was just a party atmosphere. Everybody was, all the cheering and everything. And the newspaper from Decatur, Herald Review with a transfer house, all those things were there.
The ending of World War II brought celebration to the streets of Decatur, like it did to every town across the United States. And like most places in America, those August days of 1945 would witness the last victory parade.
Almost without exception, the vets I've talked to would recall watching the old World War II movies or hanging out with their father and his buddies, at the VFW. Or
the American Legions, the VFWs, the DAVs, all those organizations were very active.
If you were going to a 4th of July minor league baseball game at Fans Field in Decatur, when the national anthem was played, I would somewhere between 90 and 95% of the people had their hands on their hearts.
It was a patriotic town. It was like every town at that time.
The success of this project is improved by the cooperation of local industrial and business concerns.
Decatur was an industrial town in its 50s and 60s, had industries, 20, 25 industries.
We've made our big yard in Decatur one of the most modern anywhere.
Norfolk Western,
CB&Q,
General Electric,
Wagner's,
Mueller's,
Borg Warner,
Firestone,
Marvel Schiebler,
Caterpillar,
Saltic Company,
Staley's.
I think Staley's might have been bigger than ADM at that point.
Most of my friends, their fathers and their dads and grandpas had come through employment in these industries since they were children.
At that time, when I was growing up, that's what you did. You just kind of followed in your dad's steps and your grandfather's steps. My dad worked at Borg Warner. He started out at the Wabash and got laid off after he had a little 9.5 years, I think, got laid off, so he went out to Borg Warner and went to work.
My dad was a blue-collar worker. He worked at Mississippi Valley.
He spent 38 years, 39 years as a boilermaker building tanks.
One of the 5 guys that came from Decatur and built the Decatur plant, helped lay that out, and then that's how we got here.
We had tons of jobs and good paying jobs. We weren't rich, but we had money.
A lot of families growing up, kids running around, and it seemed like everybody had a job, but there were a lot of factories were up and running then, and most of them have actually closed since then.
You knew your neighbors, you played with the neighbor kids, you played kick the can, you rode your bike around.
You didn't do anything wrong very often because it was like everybody knew your family or something, or they were going to report you if you did. It was pretty much a small town atmosphere, or it was a community.
Not only just around the neighborhood, we'd play ball in the street and throw snowballs at cars in the winter.
With the 21st century seemingly eternal war against terror, it's sometimes difficult to remember just how long the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union lasted. Through 5 decades and 9 presidential administrations, the free world faced off against communism. By the 1950s, the lines were drawn along the borders of Eastern Europe, the frozen battlefields of Korea, and a place few Americans had heard of.
In Indochina, an aerial counterattack is mounted to save Dien Bien Phu, reeling under the most savage communist onslaught of the war.
With the French defeat in 1954 and the subsequent division of Vietnam into the Communist North and the Western-backed South, peace in the region remained elusive.
The American-backed government was victorious, but Saigon lay scarred under the smoking devastation of civil war.
Most Americans, however, were more concerned with other Cold War realities.
There's a fear of nuclear war. We were, of course, in school. I remember we went through drills getting out of the desks. Well, in fact, my father sold air raid shelters for a while.
By the mid-1950s, men who had been too young for World War II and the Korean War began to enter the service.
When Dick had joined the Marine Corps years before and told us we were not tough enough to get through boot camp. So we said, we'll show him. So we joined the Marine Corps and left here in July of 1955.
Over the next several years, Don rose through the ranks in the Marine Corps to become an officer and a helicopter pilot. With far-flung duty stations in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and Okinawa, Japan, Sauper's service record symbolized the powerful scope and scale of America's Cold War commitments.
The struggle between freedom and tyranny, between democracy and communism, is a serious, deadly struggle. And your life, will be affected by it. You know this. You also know that your part in that struggle will mean many kinds of service to the cause of freedom.
Conscription into the armed forces, or the draft as it was more commonly referred to, was a part of life for those coming of age during the Cold War. Men like Richard Hilvety tried to exert some control over the process.
From civilian life, you could enter the Air Force into what they call the Aviation Cadet Program. I went to the Air Force and said, hey, what do? I passed these tests, and the Army's going to take me, and he said, join the Air Force. The only way you can preserve that assignment. So I did.
The recruiter came out, and I saw the big black car in the corner. I ran up in the barn and hid. I made a fort behind the bale of hay. And he left. I go home, and Mama says, he was really mad, driving all the way from Decatur. Just I'm 15.
Tommy Walters would, however, enlist in the Marine Corps after graduating from high school. Unlike most who would serve in South Vietnam, Tommy experienced a unique introduction to the country.
You can re-enlist for a duty station. So I re-enlisted 2 years for Japan. We'd land in the airplane, we're carrying a duffel bag and junk and in the formation, and some guy lights up a nighttime cigarette. The guy in charge says, "Put that, you idiot, we'll get us killed. Don't you know you're in Vietnam?" I had no idea where Vietnam was, but I was supposed to be in Japan. I spent a lot of time out in the sticks taking pictures. I'd run over the moped and take off. And I said, there's a great big Catholic church, I want to stop and take pictures. There's also a little roadside stand, a little hut thing, you know. I stopped and couldn't speak 3 or 4 words Vietnamese, so I just had a Coke sign on the wall. And I said, you know, so she brought me a Coke, ice, slide in the ice, but you drink it anyway.
Walters wrapped up his first tour without incident in 1962. At this time, Americans were serving only in an advisory and support role for South Vietnam's war against the North. While not in direct contact with the enemy, duty for Americans in South Vietnam was hazardous. In 1960, the Decatur Review reported on the death of Roger Mullins. The lieutenant commander was killed while piloting a Navy transport traveling between Saigon and Hue. Although no longer a resident of Decatur at the time of his death, he was the first Vietnam fatality connected to the city.
Whether you went to Vietnam or not, many would say that they were deeply inspired by the presidency of John Kennedy and his call to service.
I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation.
I think President Kennedy was he's the one that got me a little interested in paying attention to politics.
We'll light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world.
you began to see some of the things change then, you know. And to the fact, you know, him being the first Catholic, being president at that young age.
Kennedy's in the White House ready to be elected. Nixon's in the garbage can ready to be collected.
Everyone in those days would love President Kennedy. His wife, the way he run the country.
He was very charismatic. You know, he's a veteran himself, you know, World War II, the PT boat and all that.
Everybody started getting, you know, pretty optimistic about everything, and they was wanting to move forward.
With American idealism at an all-time high, Cold War tensions greatly increased under Kennedy's administration.
We are moving into a period of uncertain risk and great commitment.
You had Khrushchev banging his shoe at the UN, and that was the communist government.
They were just not like us. They wanted to take over the world.
They were bad people. You know, that's how you were brought up.
Guevara was bad, Castro was bad, Khrushchev's bad. Then you got that impression coming across from Cronkite and Huntley and Brinkley and everybody that was on the news.
When you're 18 years old, it's got, you're not really worried about a lot of that stuff.
Cuban Missile Crisis, I didn't pay attention to much, but I did on that. I was concerned that the world was going to end.
We were on the brink of war. I don't think we really know how close we were at that time.
We discussed it in history class, I think, because of course it was the big news of the day. We didn't know where we were going.
Cuban crisis hit. Everybody in the military was frozen. Nobody got out. At the same time, the Berlin Wall went up. So all of a sudden, a lot of tension. And so they accelerated the draft, and they got me.
Communications in Okinawa, you know, 3 men there, and the guy comes, one of the guys, hey, get up, Tommy, get up. Why? President's shot. Yeah, get it. We joke a lot. Get out of here. Within a half hour, the base is alive and ready to go.
Up Chanute Air Force Base, Hangar 2, up from office working. One of the guys downstairs came up and told my supervisor and I, because he had radio on.
I was working at Mueller's at the time. It came over the loudspeaker inside the plant there that what had happened. And
Mr. Shepard, he was this really strict math teacher. This guy, hard as nails, started misting over and tearing up.
Over there at MacArthur, and I just remember looking over at my girlfriend. She was in the same study hall as me, and we just looked at each other. I just remember that.
Bell rang a few minutes later to go to your next class, and you literally were passing hundreds of people in the hallway, and nobody said a word.
We lost one hell of a president, and I believe that he was because he stood up for America.
It was probably the most dramatic thing that probably happened to us, my generation at that time, because we knew him. He was young, he was vibrant.
I tried to watch most of it. Felt like we was there, you know, and like part of our family was gone.
There was so much hope, and then it faded.
Less than 2 months after JFK's assassination, President Johnson delivered his 1964 State of the Union address to Congress.
Declares unconditional war on poverty in America.
In a speech full of ambitious domestic goals, Vietnam was referenced only obliquely.
We shall neither act as aggressors nor tolerate acts of aggression.
The headlines of that year, however, demonstrated that South Vietnam was rapidly becoming the focal point of America's Cold War efforts.
Accompany with the government and people of South Vietnam a contest against communism, which is of the highest importance to our national interest.
For one Decatur man and his family, tours of duty in South Vietnam were already a way of life.
He would come back from a tour, and it didn't matter what time of day or night it was. Mom would get us up. Yeah, and he would come home sometimes, and it was 2 a.m., 3 a.m.
I remember one of the times he came back, and he had just this duffel bag with him, and he just started bringing out candy, and then the fun part was when he had a jar of coins.
Yeah.
And he was giving out the money.
Yeah, that was great. His dad was a railroader, worked for the Wabash. His mom was a stay-at-home mom, and evidently had some kind of heart condition and died young or when he was in high school.
Yep, sophomore.
I think after his mom died, there wasn't a whole lot of supervision. Yeah, when you say, what did he do in high school? Football and hooliganism.
They just sort of knew each other in high school because Mom was, I think, a goody two-shoes.
I don't think her childhood was very happy, and so she was kind of a big girl all through high school. Dad came home, and from what I understand, they met downtown, crossing, and
I didn't know that.
he looked at her and he said, Beth, and she looked at him and said, Herb, because he was, he had the military cut, and she was skinny.
Most of their courtship was by letter, because he had to go back and they wrote.
They wrote back and forth for at least a couple years.
Yeah, well, they got married in 52,
and he'd been in the service that whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Herbert Dexter married Beverly Funk on September 19, 1952. Shortly after their ceremony, Herbert left for service in the Korean War.
Do you want his direct words?
Sure.
It was fucking cold. I can remember him talking to Mom later on, and he could cuss in different languages. He could cuss in Korean.
Russian.
That's a skill.
Chinese. Anyway.
So he was enlisted in that.
Yeah, it took forever for him to get regular Army.
That Mom told me that one, that he was driving a Jeep and he was driving some officer around, and the guy kind of took a shine to him, and he's like, we ought to go to officer training school, and Dad was kind of like,
I've been trying.
And then it happened.
Got him going.
Yeah, to OCS.
Yeah.
Yeah, her comment was, he came home, dropped the boots, she was pregnant, he left again. He took us to Washington, D.C. 2 different times because, like I said, it was a huge history buff. But on the way there, we stopped at every damn battleground. And he would sit there and he would talk. We'd get out of the car and Mom would be looking off into space like, oh, God.
Smoking a cigarette?
Yeah. Yeah. And he would be talking and he'd have, I was the oldest, so he usually had me, and he'd try and corral you. And he'd point and he'd talk about where the troop movements were and who was coming up the hill and who was going and what general was doing what. And
So he had a book collection that's still at Mom's house. I mean, hundreds of books.
And he knew it. He knew it all. He knew why they were doing it, what they were doing, and he made it come alive. I mean, he would have been a good teacher. He wanted to teach history at the U of I. That was what he wanted to retire and do. You don't remember him singing loudly and off key, do you?
No.
Yeah.
I just remember if he was up, everybody was up.
Yeah. Beautiful streamer open to me.
Oh.
Open for me.
Yeah. Open for me. Blue sky above me and no canopy.
Yeah. There was blood upon the risers, there were brains upon shoots, and he ain't gonna jump no more. I remember that.
Yeah.
He gave us kind of a sick sense of humor. Well,
And then the
what?
fourth
Mom
tour.
said they were married 13 years, and he was gone for half of them.
Yeah, there were 3 acknowledged tours in Vietnam, and then he was there in the 57, 58, and he was what they called an advisor. They'd have parties with the rest of the guys and the wives in whatever group he was in, and little pictures have big ears, and you'd hear things. You'd hear him talking about different things that had happened, about the shoe shine boy that came into the company, and they loved this little kid. He was, one of they how they adopt these kids now, kind of, they know they don't have anything. They send them home with food. They give them, a couple bucks. They have them shine their boots, and they, give them money. And the kid came in with a bomb strapped to him and took out some of the guys. I was probably 9, 10 at that point, thinking that going through my brain that, did that kid know he had a bomb on him? Did he understand what was going on? That thought, he was my age. Did he know?
Before the 3rd tour, because Mom didn't want him to go. And then he was in the back, he was in the backyard, in the backwoods there with the machete, and you heard Mom was saying, don't go. And
she just felt like he had done his part. He didn't really need to go again. And I think they had given him an option. And that's what really upset her, that he chose to go this time. It wasn't a order to go. It's basically the Army. It's pretty much fulfilled your duty. You can or cannot. But also in the Army, if you say no, they don't ask again.
So.
Well, he wasn't going to get promoted really anymore. Once, if you're Green Beret and a major, you're kind of topped out.
So you're not expected to live.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the attrition.
I remember when Dad was over there that summer, we got calls, and he had so much time to call, like 2 minutes, because the line was 30 people long. And he was saying, we had a long, bumpy truck ride to get here, but it's cool, and the monkeys, they're feeding the monkeys.
Yeah.
And I'd rather be with you guys.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
On Saturday, September 18th, 1965, Major Dexter's unit was airlifted into battle near the village of An. This engagement, known as Operation Gibraltar, was the first time a U.S. Army unit went up against the regular North Vietnamese Army. The following day was Herbert and Beverly's 13th wedding anniversary.
And see but from what the things we read and such, yeah, he knew it was a mess when they got there, and
I know it was.
they had to, he was the only one really left to fix what they could at the time. So they got the hill and got the main, those big machine guns off of them for a little while anyway, but there was a lot of guys that caught it saying, hey, you got some crazy guy running up that hill, and everybody was following him. He just wouldn't give up. He wasn't leaving. And he could have been medevaced out of there, or possibly, depending on the chopper situation.
He was there for 24
But,
hours.
yeah.
They couldn't get to him.
I was riding my bike coming down the road out in front of the house, and my mom's hollering at me, come say goodbye to your grandparents. Let me get come say goodbye to them. And I said, they'll be back here tonight. I'll talk to them then. And she's going, no, they're leaving. They're going back to Illinois. And I kept saying, they're going to be here tonight. They're going to be back here tonight, Mom. I'll talk to them then. And they left, and the Western Union car pulled up in front of the house. And, every wife on that block came to the door. Their doors, because you don't know who they're going to come. And they came to her house.
And the next door neighbor came over right away.
And Mom just backed away from the door.
Yeah, she knew.
She said, no. She had Doug on her hip.
She knew what she was facing.
Yeah. You knew what it meant. You didn't have to read the telegram.
She lived it lots of times.
And so they went and found Nan and Papa. They were at Paducah?
They sent the state police after them, and they brought them back, and they were there that night.
They were there that night. So yeah, you were right.
Herbert was buried at Camp Butler National Cemetery in Springfield, Illinois. His wife and 5 children soon returned to Decatur.
8 years he was in the Army, and supply sergeant, just kind of, what do I do for a living? I'm in the Army, okay. And then he finally said, well, I can make something of myself, and he did.
Yeah.
Top 3% to be a Green Beret, and
He died doing what he loved.
Yeah.
And how many people can say that?
An elementary school in Fort Benning, Georgia, and the Army Reserve Center in Decatur are named in his honor. As Macon County's largest community, Decatur's population in the 1960s was nearing its peak. Along with strong regional growth, the city and outlying towns saw population grow by 40,000 in the 3 decades following World War II. This expansion, brought on by economic prosperity and the baby boomers, necessitated the construction of 3 new high schools, in addition to the existing Decatur High.
In the 60s, there were 4 high schools in Decatur, and Steve Decatur was downtown, and you felt kind of privileged to go there.
MacArthur and Eisenhower were added in 1957. The building was named for a 5-star general, and the big rivalry in town, Eisenhower, 5-star general, and Stephen Decatur was a Commodore, and so the military was behind the schools.
Lakeview High School was an experimental school. We didn't have to study. We liked to study.
Went to MacArthur High School in 1960 when the building was only 3 years old. Participated in wrestling because I was a small guy at the time, and I did quite well in wrestling, qualified for the state tournament, and was the captain of the team my last year, and was the last Decatur undefeated wrestler in 1964.
I never played sports. During basketball season, I carried the flag out on the floor, and before every game.
I played defense on football, and I threw shot put and discus and track. Sometimes I look back on it and I say, darn, I wish I'd have played baseball.
I went to Eisenhower, graduated in '63. Football, wrestling, and track. Back then we didn't have cars, we didn't have drugs.
Not a lot of smoking. A lot of cussing though, but you know.
Back in the 60s, if you were on the basketball team at Steve Decatur, we just assumed part of our schedule was a state tournament for 6 or 7 years, so it was quite an honor. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed that in high school, even more so as I look back.
When other kids, when they're 8, 9 years old, are playing baseball and football and things like that, I was playing Army. And all I ever wanted to do was join the Army. High school was just kind of like in my way.
I remember the Decatur High boys because we had an exchange assembly one time, and it was Steve Decatur's turn to come to MacArthur. And back then, the west end of town was the richer end of town. So at the middle of the assembly, the people from Steve Decatur started calling us silver spooners. But we had gotten wind of it, so in the middle of the assembly, everybody had been to the cafeteria and threw a spoon out in the middle of the gym floor.
It's a Saturday night in Decatur. 1 part hangout, 2 parts car show. Driving up and down one of the city's major thoroughfares is an activity that spans generations, both in terms of the participants and the vehicles on display. It's a veritable living history of American automotive and social culture. Most of the unique diners and drive-thrus that were familiar to baby boomers have been replaced by franchise logos that blanket nearly all of America's contemporary streetscapes. And yet, the roots of this slice of Americana run deep.
Cruising El Dorado, that was a big thing.
About every Friday night you had to make that trip.
Bunch of your buddies together, and if you ever got the car, why, you run down El Dorado and run through Sandy's.
If it wasn't a football game night or a basketball game night, you know, you were probably cruising up and down El Dorado if you had any money for gas. And gas back then was 19-20 cents a gallon.
Once in a while they'd go out and race somewhere.
Well, you had to watch a drag race going out West 36, out towards past Fairview Park, out the highway.
We used to go on down on Lakeshore Drive and go through the Shore Restaurant. Same thing, then come back up to El Dorado Street and go clear back down to the other end of El Dorado Street.
Sandy's to Sandy's, and with the stop in at Elam's in the middle.
We had to cruise through Steak and Shake on the east side there too. So
Elam's was Gary out, so we'd try to steal the tray every once in a while. That was a big thing.
And each little parking lot was a different group of people.
Meet the girls, you know, that's what we all done back then. We pulled into Sandy's on El Dorado and Jasper to have a Coke and a hamburger. And next to us, my wife now, and her girlfriend rolled down with us, small talk, said, hey, you want to cruise with us up and down El Dorado? So her girlfriend got in front with my buddy, and she got in the back with me, and we kind of hit it off after that. And then our next first date was skating on Lake Decatur.
For the guys who would go to Vietnam, the accessibility of American car culture gave a sense of mobility and empowerment never before experienced by earlier teenage cohorts. Whether it was blowing off steam, socializing with friends, or finding love, cruising El Dorado was a transition point between the last gasps of adolescent exuberance and the coming realities of adulthood.
Graduated on a Friday night, and Monday morning I came in and went to work.
You know, 3 weeks after I got out of high school, I went to Caterpillar.
I had good grades. I could have went on to college, but at the time that wasn't expected of me, you know.
The good thing was, at that time, an interview consisted of, when could you start working?
Decatur in the 60s was the opportunity city of the North, I thought. You could quit a job in the morning and have another job equally as well that afternoon.
Staley's called, wanted me to get in there for my physical at 1 o'clock. Well, I hopped back in the shower, we're getting cleaned up, got out of the shower, he said, Wagner's called. They'd like to have you in there at 2 o'clock.
For working class kids for whom college was not really an opportunity because of just the economics of it, a lot of them would say, well, the military is inevitable, therefore the only question is which branch of the service.
Once he joined and the brother next to him joined, then coming up I see blue uniforms, okay, that's what I want to be, you know.
And I had a half brother in the Air Force and another one was in the Army, and I decided, well, I'm going to join the Marine Corps. So I did.
I am not sure exactly when I wanted to join the Marine Corps. I know it became very strong my senior year.
The day I turned 18, March 9th, 1964, went down to the Marine Corps recruiting depot. A staff sergeant asked me, he said, well, what can we do for you, young man? And I said, I want to join the Marine Corps. He says, well, how old are you? I said, 18 today. He says, well, come on in.
Graduated from high school the 1st of June, 64, and the 2nd of June, 64, at dark 30, I'm in the train station with my mom. Yeah, they put me on the train, and by 10:30 that morning, I had literally raised my hand and was sworn in. In jump school, we got to request wherever we wanted to be assigned, so I put in first choice was Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and second choice was Fort Bragg, and the first overseas choice was Germany. So they sent me to Okinawa, to the 173rd on Okinawa, and I was assigned to an artillery unit there in field communications. That was an 18-month tour, but we were alerted to go to Vietnam in May, actually April of 65, and we were the first Army ground combat unit deployed to Vietnam. We pulled into Benoit, and somebody with rank said, okay, this is home. 2 days ago, 7 Viet Cong regiments went through here. Last night, 3 went through. And they said, okay, everybody relax. Well, everybody relaxed to us meant form a perimeter. We don't know what the hell's happening, and we ain't gonna be hanging our butts out here. And then when somebody tried to put us in a formation, we're thinking, this is stupid. You got us all lined up here, because we had this visions of people with machine guns just shooting us while we're all lined up, dressed right, dressed and covered down. I mean, so yeah, it was pretty scary there, at least in our own minds.
Viet Cong, fearful of the new M16 automatic weapon, called them the men with the little black rifles.
173rd was the first, I'm pretty sure was the first Army unit to be issued the M16. I never had any problems with mine, but then I had done a lot of hunting and stuff as a kid, so I knew how to clean a weapon, I knew how to take care of a weapon, and I knew that you did take care of it. I was a field communications crewman by MOS, but Vietnam was not a conventional war. And instead of having the infantry out in front of us, in front of artillery like you would normally do in World War II or something like that, we worked a little bit differently, and it was not uncommon for us at all to airlift by chopper our infantry units 7 kilometers away from the artillery, which was basically the maximum range of a 105, that's what we had. And then they would walk back towards the artillery with the idea of flushing anything in front of them, then call in artillery to finish them off. Because of the fact that there was nobody in front of us, and there was quite a few of us that had that MOS, we ended up, what we call battery recon. We would set up ambushes at night or pull perimeter security for the guns, or go out and check H&I fires the next day after they fired, harassment interdiction fires and stuff like that, to see if what they'd scored. So I really didn't do much field communications in the field at all. I remember the first time I was shot at, and we moved out online after the fire let up, and it was just like, oh, I've done this 100 times before. It just, this time it's real, you know. But I mean, hell, you know, you move out online, you're doing a sweep, okay, no big thing, that's all. Except this time, like I say, it's real. Somebody's got real bullets and they're shooting at you. I think I counted up one time, the year I was there, I think we were on like 33 operations or something, so we stayed in the field, so.
The brigade moved on from success to success. Phuoc Tuy, where a Viet Cong supply route was destroyed. Pleiku and Kon Tum in the central highlands to lift a siege and clear the roads for an ARVN relief column. And the so-called Iron Triangle.
We never knew where we were. We might be out on an operation someplace and somehow or another come across the Stars and Stripes, and we would read about where we were, because it was the first time we knew. I just knew I'm in the jungle someplace. People were proud of being paratroopers, and we had a reputation to live up to from the guys that, 6th of June, 1944, went out the door. And I mean, my recruiter, Marvin Cornett, had 2 combat jumps in Normandy and Holland. Well, I mean, and my dad in the Second World War. I mean, we had reputations that we had to live up to, and we couldn't let them down.
Well, I enlisted in my senior year in high school. I wanted to be a Marine. Turned 18 in boot camp, 5 days out of high school.
Is the experience of boot camp like Full Metal Jacket or?
Even worse. 40 men in the shower doing push-ups, butts in your face and everything. Just a common fear of the drill instructor. I got to Hawaii in about December of '63. I was an 18-year-old Marine. I was hunting women more than I was hunting headline articles and everything. I'd go down to the beach and everything else and troll the beach.
I tell you, friends, if you've got to train for war, this is the place to do it.
We were on a fast track with jungle warfare, and we were put on ships. We thought we were coming to California for an operation there. And 2 days later, this told us we're headed to Okinawa for future training. And then you knew where you're going to go.
What unit specifically were you in?
2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, the magnificent bastards. We landed at Chulian 3-3, landed at Da Nang. It's the first beachhead landing since Korea. You're going in that we're going to kick ass and take names later. And sometimes you don't realize you're on someone else's country and they think the same thing. We did come over the side, down in the Mike boats and everything else, and make the beachhead landing. It's supposed to have been an opposed landing. The only thing we found there was women and kids selling beer and ice. You had trouble getting around these people. You just wonder, where the hell is the war at? We are on what they call the FIBA. We were the forward edge of the battle area. We were out on outpost. They called them catfish 1, 2, and 3, and perch 1, 2, and 3. They're just mountain ranges. You sit in on top of them. Listening post, what it is. Mine was a grunt. Go out and find them, destroy them. That's 0311. We had the M14s. Well, it was reliable. We didn't have any trouble with it. Like the trouble I had with the M16. And you go around an ambush, you just have you and your weapon. That's about it. And your bayonet and your knife. Take your dog tags and tape them together. You learn to walk real slow. Watch how you put your foot down. You never got in a hurry. All the music and everything. There's more musicians over there you could take a stick at. Them guys could write songs and play guitar and everything. Yeah, they could come up with some nasty ass songs and everything.
Like most who would follow him in the years after 1965, Jones did get an opportunity for rest and relaxation during his tour in Vietnam.
Went to Bangkok. Yeah.
How was that experience?
So I'm gonna go back to Bangkok. 18 years old, 19 at that time. Yeah, let's go back to Bangkok with approval. Right, Mother? Mm-hmm. Had captured a North Vietnamese soldier who told them that they were going to hit the Chu Lai airstrip on the 20th of August. August 18th, 65, yeah. But due to the fact the operation they were running, they were so close to the ocean, South China Sea, they brought a unit in from the South China Sea too. Tried to catch him in a pinch movement. And it did. It pinched him. And we use these old little helicopters too. UH-34s, like little egg beaters. You get 6 people in them things. And we took off early in the morning by helicopters and got to our landing zone and everything, just quiet. So we got online and headed for the first village called Nan Yim 3. And shoot, we got within rifle range of that village and just all hell broke loose. We were surrounded. We landed in the middle of them. We had our hands full. Right in the middle of the battle there, we had lots of people got wounded that day. Many got killed and everything.
Where were you wounded at?
On the shoulder and in the face. Yeah.
So were you walking wounded at that point?
Oh, yes.
You stay out in the field then?
Mm-hmm. No, they manage you up out there. It's supposed to have been one day. We were engaged 5 days. Night they'd fly around with plane and drop flares all night long, so it stayed lit 24 hours a day. Just kept on fighting. They didn't attack the airstrip, no. They were decimated. They lost a lot of men, about 3,000 of them.
So in a lot of ways, it was a victory then for Marines.
It was always a victory, when you get the guy, they cut and run and everything else, but like Randy said, it wasn't for airstrike and naval gunfire. If you didn't have the upper hand, it would be a different story if they had airstrikes too.
1965 was the bellwether year for America's war in South Vietnam. The decisions made in the hearts and minds of Washington's best and brightest would now start to have an impact on the lives of thousands of young Americans.
There was a group of my friends that were younger than me that decided to go together as a group and join the Marine Corps. And when one of them didn't come back from that war, from the Vietnam War, I took notice.
About 1/3 of Vietnam-era soldiers were what I would call true volunteers. I mean, they really were drawn to it with positive motives. They thought it was the right thing to do and would be, good for their lives.
I'd been at Caterpillar for about 1.5 years, and I don't know if I was experiencing boredom or wanted new experiences in life or what, but I just decided one day I was going to go down and talk to the recruiter downtown, Decatur, and see if they could get me a 2-year enlistment.
Another third were what even the military would refer to as draft-induced volunteers. They were technically volunteers. In many of these working-class communities, that was the source for so many of that generation, the Vietnam generation soldiers. There was this sense that military service was inevitable, not just because there was a lot of cultural support for it in those communities and this sort of tradition, family traditions, but because they knew the draft notice was coming.
Back then, your name went on a list, and then as they drafted off the top of the list, the bottom of the list went up. And I was going to be drafted the next month. I was going to the top of the list, getting to the top. And they said they were going to have to take so many, and I would be getting a draft notice. So I just walked across the street and enlisted.
I think it was right after I was notified by the draft, I enlisted.
And then there was another third were the pure draftees. They were in fact drafted into the military.
And so the mailman pulls up in his old truck and he gets out and I remember waxing the side of the Volkswagen, and he comes up and taps me on the shoulder with this letter, and he says, "I believe this one's for you, son."
I was carrying mail at the particular time, and I happened to be delivering my parents' address, and I delivered my own draft notice, which was kind of different, to say the least. It didn't make my day.
We opened it up and it said, "Greetings, your friends and neighbors have selected you for the armed service." I say now, and I said it back then, I'd sure like to see my neighbors and friends turn me in. I'd poke them in the nose.
2 months after I turned 19, I was working in an apprenticeship at Caterpillar and was drafted right out of the apprenticeship. And when they call, you go.
Much like today, if a young man had not already planned to enlist, the graduating senior had to make one of two choices: go to college or enter the workforce. However, making that choice in the mid-1960s through early 1970s had profound consequences.
Graduated and went to work at a factory somewhere.
High school graduates found plenty of work in Decatur's factories. This golden age of manufacturing and union labor provided young men with a sense of independence and income. But without the protection that the academic deferment offered, most of these working individuals soon caught the attention of the local draft board.
I'd just gone out in like April or May and bought that 65 Chevelle. But knowing I was going to be drafted, I would have gone out and bought the car.
Upon receiving the letter from the draft board, the inductee was legally required to report to the nearest induction center for an evaluation and physical. Going to college greatly reduced the possibility of being drafted. Known as a 2S deferment, this status kept the vast majority of middle and upper-class males out of uniform, or at least away from the battlefields of Vietnam. Upon graduating, many with university diplomas were still susceptible to the draft, especially after 1968, when deferments for graduate school were no longer given. In order to preserve his 2S deferment, the student needed to be enrolled in the university full-time and be in good standing. He had to keep his grades up so as not to fall behind on the number of credit hours needed to be considered a freshman, sophomore, etc. With some poor life choices and a bad semester or two, the college student, too, could wind up getting a letter from his friends and neighbors. Those picked for the draft reported to an induction center. For Decatur men, this meant traveling to St. Louis for a medical evaluation. If a draftee was found to be medically unfit, he was given a 4F status, which made him unqualified for military service. The few who were able to prove conscientious objector status, 1O, as well as those already serving in the Reserves or National Guard, 1D, would have likely already dealt with the local draft board. Those men who passed the physical were deemed 1A and available for military service.
18 and 19-year-old boys just growing up, sowing their wild oats, just enjoying life, and all of a sudden that comes to a halt.
From July 1965 until the institution of the lottery system in December 1969, this system inducted between 30 and 50,000 men a month. While most draftees were bound for the Army, approximately 20,000 were drafted into the Marine Corps. The majority of those who served in Vietnam did so voluntarily. However, it is unknown exactly how many enlisted due to the possibility of the draft. In the heart of Decatur, two once mighty railroads intersect, the Illinois Central and the Wabash. Though trains still play a vital role for the community's industries, the passenger trains running from Chicago, Detroit, and St. Louis no longer rattle by. Generations of Decatur's sons departed on those trains as they went off to fight the wars of the 20th century. The young men who served in Vietnam, at least in the early years of the conflict, left Decatur like their fathers and grandfathers before them. In November of 1965, these four men, all draftees, also found themselves standing on the platform of the Wabash Depot. Half a century later, they recall their emotions.
I just remember it was a cold and miserable morning, and everybody was anxious, scared.
Just a situation is uncertain what's going to happen.
I knew I was in a little bit of trouble when my dad took me over to the life insurance machine that was in the lobby over there, and told me to put the money in and told me to sign it. And I said, "What's this for?" He should just sign it. He was kind of a little hardcore kind of guy.
So he lost.
He lost. Yeah, he lost.
We stopped along, I think it was, we picked a few up in Taylorville, Hamel. It seemed like to me we picked up some in Litchfield.
Yep, because we came around and you could see the arch starting to come up.
It was starting to come together.
Yeah, it started to come up there.
Yeah, excited.
Yep.
Yeah, and then when we got off the train, we walked down a ways to some building, didn't we?
Yeah.
Recruiting center or something.
Yep.
Lined up and everybody counted off by fives. So they got done counting off and they said, "Oh, everybody's number 5, step forward." They stepped forward and they said, "You are now a Marine."
Ooh.
I was at number 4.
Although in their late teens and early 20s, 3 of the 4 men were already married. Their young wives, too, bore the burden of the unknown.
Yeah, my mother had to sign for me to get married.
Mine too.
Yeah, right. They got married in September, and we got married in October.
Okay.
Then you guys left in November.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was dark and cold, and we had to be here real early. I went home and cried a lot that day, and a lot of other days.
That's all you do is cry.
Yeah, you cry and cry and cry.
It's terrible, especially with your brother and husband going.
Yeah.
That is
Same time.
double whammy, isn't it? Really.
It would be awful.
Just thought he was going to go to Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, and that would be fine. We could do that. But he called me and said, "I'm on my way to California." I'm a Marine.
They lived up to the Hollywood hype that it had. They beat the shit out of you. And they had they didn't regret anything. They point blank shaved our heads, and the guys had come running out of the barbershop crying. I mean, they had hair down to their waist.
The worst part was they made you pay for that haircut. Yes.
No, we didn't pay for it.
We did. Yeah, we had to pay for it. We had to pay for that haircut.
After many decades of successfully running his own small business, Harold Brusso has an established group of lifelong friends and neighbors. Although these 3 others were not born and raised in Decatur, their time in Vietnam is typical of those drafted in the early years of the war.
We
Fair-sized
built a big evac hospital there at Benoit, and then we built tons of
Okay, so yeah.
artillery pads and,
there's
and all
Benoit.
kinds of stuff.
I made so many operations in Phu-Bai, Chu-Lai, Da Nang, Dong Ha, Quang Tri, the DMZ. I've been the whole, and I couldn't tell you what month. I spend all my time out in the jungle or the rice paddies. Like I told you before, when I was out and I come back, I went right back out. I didn't stay in what they call
Base camp or whatever.
Yeah.
Didn't stay. I went back out.
You got the big tour. The rest of it,
yeah, I saw all kinds of jungle.
Well, I did too, but we pushed a lot of it over.
But you know,
I don't know how many rubber tree plants that we, those plantations we cleared out.
Did you widen the road that went from Benoit to the replacement camp at Long Bend?
I want to say yeah.
Because the story was, when I got there, it had been widened out, but they cut a road through a rubber plantation and, laid the asphalt down and everything. And the Viet Cong knew that these buses were hauling inbound troops from Benoit Air Base to the replacement center at Long Bend, and they set claymore mines on the rubber trees that were next to the road and blow those buses off the road. But
we ran convoys from Fan Rang to the train. That's where we had to get all of our food and supplies. And twice a week we ran convoy up there, and you had to go past a rubber plantation just south in the train, and that was
so you were in what?
place that you already had to.
You were in Nha Trang, so you were up here.
We were at Fan Rang.
Oh, Fan Rang? Here, right here.
Yeah, we were here.
Okay.
And we landed at Cameron Bay and then moved down here.
Okay.
But we had to get our supplies at Nha Trang.
Okay.
And that's where the hospital was.
Yeah. So Ken was in this area towards the shore. Nick and I, we were down around the Saigon, Benoit, Long Bend area.
Harold was
up here where it kind of no man's land. So we all got different perspectives.
For nearly all of Decatur's servicemen in the Army, basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri was their first taste of military life.
Got inducted at St. Louis and did my basic at Fort Leonard Wood, sometimes known as Fort Lost in the Woods.
It was cold down there. The barracks were from World War II. There was upper respiratory infections going around, so they had every other window halfway wide open.
It was cold, but if we kept marching, we kept busy, we stayed warm.
I always heard before we went down there that it was called Little Korea. It was hot, we're down there in June and July, and I mean, it's hot down there.
That prepared me for Vietnam somewhat.
They called it doing PT on the rocks. And we trained, we're training for warfare. It was tough. And they wasn't playing either.
I went in boot camp weighing 136 pounds. And I got out of boot camp 13 weeks later weighing 165 pounds.
Upon completing basic training, servicemen were assigned a job known as an MOS, or a Military Occupational Specialty. Regardless of service branch, recruits then attended related training schools.
Then we got our MOS. Mine was 11 Echo 20, tank crewman.
They had more wiremen than you need, so I went into artillery. I didn't really have a choice. They said, you're going to artillery.
The sergeant looked over my records and scores and all that. And he said, can you type? And I said, no, I didn't take it to school. I really don't know how to type. He says, can you type? I said, no, not really. He said, you can type, can't you? I said, oh, yeah, I can type. So,
well, this friend of mine, John Baker, from MP school, they had an assembly and said that they were needing volunteers for dog school. And John and I thought, well, that sounds pretty cool. So we went and signed up for it. Okay, they were called sentry dogs, but in reality, they were attack dogs. That's all they were attack dogs. And the precept of the training at that time was to make all humans his enemy except you. So no human treated him good except you. I fed my dog, I groomed my dog, I took care of my dog, and I was the only person that was nice to my dog. So therefore, all other human beings were the enemy.
So I went through an aviation school and They didn't really talk a whole lot about Vietnam. They just concentrated on the actual aircraft and the job that you need to do on that. So.
After Fort Leonard Wood, I went to Fort Eustis, Virginia for my AIT, and I was trained as a aircraft instrument repairman, and then I went to Fort Benning, Georgia.
Fort Benning, Georgia was home to many Army training schools. It was there that former draftee William Buchenschutz decided to enroll in officer candidate school.
It's the sort of thing that you do once in your life and you're glad you did it. But if they had taken my commission away from me and allowed me to go back to OCS to get it back, they could have kept it. It was pretty well directed towards Vietnam at that point. When you went out, you did a lot of things on ambush patrols, how to escape an ambush.
Fort Polk was set up especially for Vietnam training, and I was the second group to go through this training. We termed it the hellhole of the United States, quite honestly, or at least my group did, because having been to the Nam and looking back, you couldn't have asked for training that was more similar than it was in Vietnam.
Everyone that was going to Fort Polk, Louisiana was being trained to go to Vietnam. And all my AIT training was focused on training you for Vietnam.
For career officers, the war in Vietnam had taken precedence as well.
During that period of time, it was a given. Number one, I knew I was going to go. Number two, I knew I'd better go for career purposes. It's the only war we had. And we thought it was going to be over soon. She was a wonderful Marine wife, and she loved being an officer's wife. But I said, no, honey, I just got orders. I have to go. She always believed I volunteered.
I know when I finally got my orders and told Mom and Dad, of course, they were devastated, but I went in boot camp expecting that's where I would be going.
Company gunny came in, he had a list in his hand. He says, I'm looking for some guys to go to Vietnam. He says, I need a couple of radio operators and a couple of wiremen. And I said, I'll go, Gunny. He said, shut up, Barry, you're already on the list.
West Coast cities like San Francisco served as a point of departure for U.S. servicemen leaving for South Vietnam. Men from rural areas like Decatur found the city by the bay to be quite different from home.
And the guy driving the bus, he was in the Army. He says, you guys want to take a little tour? He says, if you give me a quarter apiece, I'll give you a little tour of the city. So we all gave him a quarter. We went up that road, the pervious road in the world. We went to Fisherman's Wharf. We went down to Haight-Ashbury, right down the street, and it was just full of hippies and kids down there. And anyway, we went all over, and he took us back to the post. It was a good deal.
Because I'm fresh off the farm in San Francisco, you know, hippies, peace, love, Hare Krishna, every place. So I didn't know what to think one way or the other.
Departing San Francisco Bay by ship was common early in the war. Servicemen left for the conflict as they had for World War II and the Korean War before.
And we got on a cargo ship called the USS Barrett. And then the first meal they served us was, I think they did this on purpose, was spaghetti and chocolate pudding. And when we hit that sea, there was puke everywhere. It was running through the steel steps and everything.
It was the USS Barrett. It took 29 days for us to get over there.
There was about, I think, 2,500 Marines on this ship and 500 Army, and they kept us separated the whole time.
Commercially chartered flights soon, however, transported the vast majority of American personnel to South Vietnam.
We flew to Alaska in khakis. They let us off the airplane with 10 feet of snow on the runway, and we decided to have them open the bar, which they did.
We're out at sea, and then we're getting closer, and at nighttime, we'd see this flashing, little flash, 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 out there on the horizon line, and what is that? And those are airstrikes in Vietnam, and what? And then we knew then, everybody got real quiet, and then we knew we were getting close to the real deal here.
And when that big aircraft landed, I figured, they'd be throwing a rifle in my hand and you had to fight your way to the compound, Well, it wasn't anything like that.
it didn't seem that much different until you got off the plane and the heat hit you. It's 117 degrees.
You could see action from the ship, mortars going and shells going off and tracers going all over the place. And I said, oh my God.
Landed in Saigon at Tonsanute Air Base at about midnight, and it was being mortared. First words you heard was the back of the plane opened up and you heard run. So off we went.
Flew us to Da Nang, and the night we pulled in there, they were shooting mortars and everything else.
Well, they put us in a little camp in Benoit. It's sort of a reception center when the new recruits come in country. And the first night was there, they blew up the ammo dump.
I landed in Cameron Bay, and they said you'll be going to 22nd or something replacement company. What they do is they keep sending you on down the line, and everybody's got somewhere they're going to send you. And they read the names, and they said, these people will be going to Pleiku, that's Combat Alley, and my name was called, so that's where I ended up at Pleiku.
Riding on the truck and the smell of the country, I thought I wouldn't be able to take it, everything had the same smell, and then you see the kids, and we going through the villages and stuff, kids running up trying to sell you something, and I knew then that I didn't want to be there.
I went to the recon unit there at Da Nang, 3rd Recon, 3rd Marine Division, 3rd Recon, Charlie Company. And I got there just a couple of days before they were moving out for Fubai, which is just south of Way City. And they had a helicopter airfield up there. And we set in right around that, and then we ran patrols out of there.
The thing that sticks in my mind when we got to Vietnam, or I went into this replacement group, the sergeant there says, boys, they've cut out recess. This is it.
So my first detail was to go out there, I had to burn shit. I don't know if people know that went on over there, but that's how they got rid of it. You had generally there's 3 holders. They take a 55-gallon drum barrel, cut it in about thirds, and they had like handles, you'd handle like that, but you didn't. You had hooks. You'd hook it and drag it out, pour diesel fuel in it, and light it and burn it. And when you got done burning it, you could fill a coffee cup with ash. It'd burn it all away,
No matter where they arrived and no matter which branch of service, Americans in South Vietnam were part of a massive nation-building program that had not been attempted on such a scale since the Marshall Plan following World War II. The American military embarked on a civil improvement program to help win the hearts and minds of the South Vietnamese, as well as to support the airmen, soldiers, and Marines who were taking the fight to the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army.
A joint project of an American and Vietnamese construction team, the structure is an odd mixture of a modern American design and primitive methods of hand labor. Work was still going forward, but for the most part the facility was almost completed. The dispensary is part of the Civic Affairs program to improve the education and health of the villagers. Vietnamese orphans wave their flags to celebrate the building of a new orphanage. The date is 12 December 1965, and the Vietnamese Honor Guard salutes the arriving members of the U.S. Army Signal Corps, whose financial contribution made the new orphanage possible.
Roads, fire bases, air bases, hospitals, harbors, and docks were all needed to be built. While the scope of the war was limited by Washington, involvement in South Vietnam would cost the United States $2 billion a month by 1967.
For all of this is evidence which will stand as lasting reminders that the Americans who came this way, as allies of their government, came as friends.
And I told them that I was better trained than they were, but they were more experienced than I was. And I told them I would court-martial if I didn't shoot the first SOB that let me do something that got some people killed. And I guarantee you I will do it. So you best be prepared to tell me if I'm doing something wrong.
I was second lieutenant, first lieutenant, so, you know, like one of you said, that's the privates of the officer corps, so you take all the crap from the higher up there too, but I mean, I guess the one thing that affected me a little bit is, you know, I was 23 years old and they give you roughly 40 guys and send you over to combat zone and say, you know, you're supposed to take care of them. Well, you know, that kind of wakes you up a little bit that, you know, you're somehow kind of responsible for these people, you know. And,
Vietnam looks pretty small on the map, but it's plenty big when you move around in it on foot.
One of our squads was pinned down by enemy fire, and as soon as we got out with the tanks, the enemy disappeared.
3 out of 4 firefights in Vietnam took place at a time and a place that was chosen by the enemy, and even the duration was controlled by the enemy, so that the typical firefight in Vietnam was begun by the Viet Cong, the Southern guerrillas, or the North Vietnamese regular forces attacking American or South Vietnamese troops.
A lot of times we would fly out, drop us off, and then we would start moving and just move around through the countryside. It was kind of a show the flag thing. And if you could kick up something, well, that was great. You know, the idea was if you could, you did, you wanted to. Thing was, we were good enough, and Charlie was smart enough. He could tell when you should and when you shouldn't mess with them.
Assigned to the mortars, but I was also a radio telephone operator, RTO, and carried the radio for either the captain or the sergeant in the squad. Our sergeants and our lieutenants, they were pretty good people, and taking command of the situation is what we were supposed to do.
Usually the big problem is trying to identify where it's at. Charlie was very good at shooting, and once he shot, to move.
Didn't directly engage a lot. Really hadn't expected anything, but the helicopters dropped us into a landing zone area, and from that we were to do search and destroy. But they were about 5 feet off the ground when they said get out. And so, you know, you jumped out, and well, by the time we got out of the tall grass and into an area where we thought, you know, we had some cover, we had 3 guys that were killed that were out front. And it was kind of amazing because we got into this firefight, and like I said, these 3 guys were killed, and the captain had ordered chow out to the landing zone area, and after that the chow came and it started to rain, so we had it all in one day.
We would get in fights with them on the mountain, but it wasn't no wind because they dug into the mountain. They had tunnels all over there, especially in the jungles and things, yeah. At first we was afraid to go in that tunnel. You don't know what you run into because they might have a booby trap.
One day, there was this mama san, and she was crying, and she had these 2 little girls down in the tunnel, and they wouldn't come out. So I volunteered to go down and get them. It was quite an honor to get those 2 little children out. They were just playing. But then all of a sudden it turned into the real games from hell. When you go down there and you're fighting one-on-one, there's somebody that wants to kill you. After a while, it comes to a point where you think you're indestructible, but then you turn a corner in a tunnel and an AK-47 sitting at your forehead, pulling the trigger, and it goes click. So it was your lucky day.
Nothing ever prepares you for combat until you're in it. You don't know how you're going to act, where you can shoot another man or him shoot you. You don't know that feeling till you've been there. It's a gory way to talk about it, but you get where you look forward to the adrenaline rush of a gunfight.
Once you've heard a Russian AK-47, you won't hardly forget the clack, clack, clack. You get down and see how low you can get. We had been pretty well trained. And of course, there were the point men in the squad that were out front leading your group.
Of course, nobody wanted to walk point, and it got to be where I felt more comfortable walking point than having other guys walking point. Set off a booby trap, or didn't set it off. I actually tripped it, and I heard it was one of our grenades. I heard bing, and I knew exactly what that sound was, and it didn't go off. So, I mean, God was smiling on me.
Then there were the chaplains. I can't tell you how much we admired these men, regardless of which religion they stood for. They thought enough of us and the message they brought to come right into the hot spots in VC country where we were.
And thanks to the Marine Corps, I can't remember when I ever missed, but even when I was in the jungle, they sent a priest out to me, and it was no bigger than this. He set up the altar on a log and gave communion.
We had one of the base camps we were in had the only tree, and the chaplain needed an altar area for mass and services on Sunday, so I used some bamboo, and our corpsman, which of course is Navy, tied a real nice knot to make it look good, and set up some ammo cases and put canvas over it so they'd have something to use as an altar.
You know, you do a lot of praying to God when you're in a war, and you know what kind of person you want to be if God lets you live.
Some of the guys, they had a hard time believing that there was a God that, after seeing the way some of the guys were brutalized or shot up or whatever, how he would allow such things to happen. I said, well, you can look at it the way you want to, but for me, God didn't start this thing. We humans did this. I said, this isn't a God-made war. This is our own doings.
The United States had a colossal arsenal, far superior to anything that the enemy had. I mean, we had these supersonic jets, we had B-52s, we had helicopters, and it's all kinds of ammo at the beck and call of the young lieutenant who could bring in hell in a second.
I got to see Puff the Magic Dragon in action one time. I think it's a DC-3 or DC-6, where they've got the 3 miniguns on one side, and they just kind of turn sideways, and it's just a solid stream. Every fifth one's a tracer, but it's just a solid stream coming out of there. That was impressive.
During the day, we'd sit there, we had a formation, and that's when we'd really get to it. And we would fire every day and every night. Got very little sleep. Well, it's kind of been a while, but then I put the primer back in, and as soon as they got the round in and the powder charge in, close and lock the breech and wait for him to tell me to fire. He said 4 or 5 rounds a minute, but we'd fire sometimes 8, probably 8 to 10 rounds a minute. But if they needed it, we'd fire.
The VC were more of a guerrilla type, radical South Vietnamese or maybe some North Vietnamese, but they were the PJ guys, the black pajama guys. The NVA were actually either reservists or regulars that were coming out of North Vietnam. We saw 4 of them one day up on a big rock, and we called artillery on them. And we were sitting down below these guys about 150 yards or so. They had a tunnel underneath this great big boulder, and they had guys sneak down in there, and then they'd get out during the day and watch, with field glasses, watch what we were doing down in the valley or around them. And then they'd report that to their people, and then they'd try to ambush us or whatever. So we called that in, and the guy called back on the radio and says, just let us know when you want it. And the patrol sergeant at that time says, tell him to get it down. So I said, fire for effect. and man, it was perfect. 6 rounds right on top of that rock. There wasn't even a blood spot there.
The second most common firefight would be an attack on a stationary position, like a middle of the night wave attack on a fire base.
My going out was different than infantry. You know, those guys would go out for 30, 60 days at a time. I didn't do that. I'd go out at night, and when the sun come up, you couldn't use the dogs, so you'd come back into the base and then wait till dark. And some of us used to say when it got dark, you went hunting. You just went out and went hunting. This one particular night, I was over in the POL dump, and this other guy was over in the ammo dump. Well, they come in through him. They didn't come in through me. Once everything started, the dogs are useless at that point, unless you can actually see them. So I just found a place to hide and watched to see if anybody was going to try to get through. And no one come through where I was at.
I'm not brave, I don't mean it that way, but I don't really remember fear. It was just a job that needed to be done and doing it. Mine was basically taking the ammo out of the cans. Mortars have fire powder around the base of them. The gunners would call out what they needed as far as the number of increments on them. You set them, hand them to the gunners, and they fire the weapon.
Well, we called it Dog because it was H-34D. The proper name was Seahorse, the Marine Seahorse. The aircraft doesn't get enough credit for what it did. The H-34 was outmoded at the time we were using it. That bird did things it was not supposed to do every day, all day, as long as I flew it. It was a wonderful, wonderful aircraft. Yeah, I'll never forget my first mission. I think I had a couple of hops to familiarize me with the squadron combat tactics, the way they wanted entry into an LZ. The Army's technique was to fly at treetop level, so they'd pick up every round that every farmer down there was shooting. We flew at 2,000 to 2,500 feet to the target. Our penetrations into an LZ, cold or hot, were vertical. We'd go over the LZ and dump the nose, and we'd fly vertically like we were diving right at the LZ, pull full collective at the last minute, pump that baby onto the deck, troops are off, and we're out of there. So we had, I think, 22 aircraft that we could supply. We flew down there, picked up all Marines, all American Marines. So I was flying co-pilot, and the word, obviously, at that time in any helicopter squadron is if you're a newbie and if you're a co-pilot, you sit on your hands. And as it turns out, the group commander of Mag 36 had prepped the wrong landing zone. And what I mean by prepped is they always send in fixed wing with 20 millimeter cannon, napalm, to take out any possible resistance in an LZ before the choppers come in. The whole place was, of course, afire and smoke from the prep. And we went in, and it was this regimental headquarters of a regiment of the 324B that had a crossfire in the zone with 50 caliber machine guns. We went in, we got chewed up. We lost, I think, out of our squadron, 7 or 8 aircraft in that particular wave. We took 2 rounds, 250 caliber rounds up through the engine. Thank God they went up between the pilots, out through the top, but we lost our engine, so we were just barely able to get out of the zone. And the next morning, we got another bird, and we were out picking up the bodies. We lost, I think, 112 Marines in the first 12 hours, KIA, and I never forget flying those aircraft were coming in stacked at the top of the doorway with bodies. You know, everybody can say they do it for God and country and family and apple pie or whatever. You do it for your brother Marine. That's what it's all about.
Communities and the people that live in them are always in a state of flux. Although originally from nearby Springfield, Glenn King was killed a week before Herbert Dexter fell in September of 1965. The following year, 1966, would see 5 of Decatur's sons lost in South Vietnam. James White, William Foran, and Ronald Shelton were killed in the spring. White had left Lakeview High School to join the service. The 19-year-old had earned his diploma while in the military. Foran was also 19 years old at the time of his death. The Marine had previously been wounded 3 times during his tour of duty. Captain Ronald Shelton left Decatur for West Point and received his commission from there in 1959. The Special Forces officer is buried in Tacoma, Washington. In the fall of '66, 20-year-old Brian Stockwell and John Russell Smith were killed in South Vietnam. Smith had been in country for 9 months at the time of his death. The 19-year-old had graduated from Stephen Decatur High and was remembered fondly by his classmates.
John Smith was on a wrestling team. He was 1 year ahead of me. And he wrestled all 4 years. And I became close with John. John was kind of like my mentor since he was older. He kind of helped me out quite a bit. John was one of the main reasons why I joined the Marine Corps. My senior year is when John got killed over there. And that's kind of like what made me decide to go in the Marine Corps instead of going to a factory and then getting drafted. Basically what would have happened, I mean, back in '66.
The medic usually stick with the platoon leader, like the lieutenant, the platoon leader, and the radio man. And the medic usually walk with them. But I always try to distance myself from them, stand back, walk back, because I'm the first one they want, The
snipers, for whatever reason, they always figured that they got to get the lieutenant. Look for the guy that's got an antenna. Well, the guy's walking in front of him is the lieutenant. I was walking up a dike. I had come down a dike this way, and he saw me, and he saw my RTO, and he saw this sergeant. Well, he shot. I now have a hearing aid in that ear. It whistled past this ear, my RTO's ear, and it gave that guy a rug burn across his chest. Didn't break the skin, but he had a red mark. Went through his field gear, so knocked him off the dike, but he didn't get any one of us. But it was a shot that I couldn't have made. I couldn't have put it past all 3 of us. I'd have hit somebody. Not, without, if I'd have tried to put it in there, you couldn't have done it. But they always shot for your head. They always shot for your head. If they'd have learned to lower their aiming point, they'd have taken more people out. He'd have taken me out. Probably killed me. Once in a while, if they had the upper hand, they knew they had the upper hand, they would stand and fight.
Basically, we were taking a break when we started to move out. It just started raining bullets. I mean, it was just like that. All the jungle opened up. We had, I think, 2 killed in the initial burst. We called artillery in an hour and a half into the battle. I was behind a tree, and a sniper opened up on me, and I think I don't know whether it was the initial round or one of the rounds went through my upper thigh, and I found myself out from behind my tree. I started to move, and I looked down, and just all of a sudden it was just all blood. My weapon was laying away from me. I missed, when I got hit, I must have thrown it or whatever. But then I finagled my way back behind the tree, and then the next thing I can remember is this guy came up and threw me over his shoulder and took me back to the rear.
1 or 2 guys get shot. They would holler medic, medic. I had to lay there for a few moments, a few seconds anyway, and try to get myself together before I just jump up and run.
Images of jungle patrols and ambushes are seared into America's national memory of the Vietnam War, and yet the majority of Americans who served there did so through non-combat duties.
Yeah, I was an aircraft electrician, and I took care. We didn't actually completely tear things down and repair them, but like if it had a bad instrument or something went wrong, or they had a battery problem, I would take the whole instrument out and then replace it with another one.
And you had a bunch of generators that run that. You had to maintain them too. Plus you had to learn how to
do flight coordinates in case enemy planes come in or something. You got to be able to shoot these missiles at them if you have to.
My total time over there, maybe 12 days or so on bridges, working on bridges. Other than that, we were hauling something up and down the road.
In Duckville, it was hell. We got hit almost every night. A 122 rocket had a direct hit on my bunker, and you could feel it shudder. And we waited and waited to die, and it was a dud.
The red alert come out and the siren went off. That means if they penetrate the perimeter. And about then, I mean, the biggest explosion you ever seen went off. They hit our ammo dump. And that's when a buddy of mine went and grabbed one of the 30 calibers off the helicopter and we got it loaded up and we're ready for action. We was there, and pretty soon, I mean, it just like all hell broke loose. Whoa! I mean, you went up there, you couldn't help but go up there. Up there you went. The tripod and the machine gun flipped over, and my buddy, he was flipping in the air, and we come back down. We had to raise 3 foot. That was the closest one to hit, probably 25 to 30 foot from us. It was a rocket.
Despite the monotony of duties or the sheer terror of combat, American servicemen did find some time to unwind from their obligations.
They had the Vietnamese imitating the rock bands. Some of them didn't sound too bad.
We had a fabulous rock and roll band come up from Saigon, Vietnamese. They were up there all the time, man. To most of us, that was better than going watching Bob Hope.
USO shows would come in there once in a while. We didn't get to see many of them. There wasn't a lot of them that liked to come out as far out as we were.
I didn't know him at the time, but of course he's in the bathroom. I just scratched Decatur, Illinois on the side of the wall. Well, I was in there a couple days later, and somebody wrote on there, "Who's from here?" and wrote his name on the wall. So I looked the guy up, and he worked in the avionics room at our home base. He ended up, he was from Mount Zion. And I got to know him, a guy by the name of Richard Zabosky. And later on, when I started working at Caterpillar, he worked at Caterpillar. So we got to know everybody, so.
Maintaining communication with family back in the States was difficult for servicemen in Vietnam. Letters were the primary form of correspondence.
Our only communication was by letters. And let's see, well, when my son was born, the Red Cross got a hold of me, and I got to go into Saigon and talk on the phone. It was like on a walkie-talkie. You know, you'd say something and say over. It was just like a two-way radio. And of course, you're all upset and everything. So and then lost contact. So that was kind of weird.
14th of March, 1967. Dear folks, well, it's me again. How are things going back home? Nothing has changed, has it? Did you get them rolls of film that I sent you? If you did, I hope they took good. When you get them developed, send them to me, 'cause I want to see how they turned out. I will look at them and then send them back home. Things over here have slowed down a little bit. For the last week or so, they had us hauling ammo all hours of the day and night. Some units got hit pretty bad up here last week. I got the box of candy bars, and they tasted pretty good. The sun has come back out, and I hope it stays out for a while. I was getting tired of it always raining. Well, that's about all for now. See you in 193 days. Jim.
Jim Bradshaw was killed in action 4 days later. The path towards the war's escalation was nearly complete. Decatur lost 8 men in 1967. Carl Gene Smith and Stephen Bangert, along with Michael Kelly, Don Redfern, and Leroy Nelson, were killed in the spring and summer that year.
Leon become part of our family, really. You know, my mom and dad even had a bed for him at our house. I had a room that was big enough to have 2 beds. We had twin beds in there, and he had a room there. We played on the same basketball team, so we were really close. He just wasn't a good runner. He was really a track star. he would run to school and back from, he lived down by Garver Brick Church, you know where that's at? He would run from there all the way to Argenta and then run back from, back and forth to school, you know. And when it was time for him to go, he got drafted then. He got married, but he still got drafted. And, you know, I begged him, I said, I can get you in the Guard, because he had real good credentials, you know, no problems at all in life. And I said, I can get you in. He said, I don't want to do that. He said, you're tied up for 6 years. I said, I know, but I said, you could get killed over there too. He said, I'll take my chances. He said, I just want to get in and out. Well, I wish he'd have paid attention to me, you know. I just know that I would just love to have seen what his life would have been like if he could have reached the age of 72 like I am. He would have been, what a wonderful thing if I could have go in there and right now pick up the phone and call him. You know, what a wonderful thing if he could have been there when my son was born, my daughter was born.
When that really hit home was, I had a cousin from Warrensburg, Frank, that got killed. And that opens your eyes.
Bryant and Brackett are buried in Graceland Cemetery in Decatur. Located just west of a busy state highway, Graceland is where the majority of Decatur's fallen from the Vietnam War rest.
They understood, after even some cases just a few hours in Vietnam, or at least a few weeks, that they had really been sold a bill of goods, as the whole country had, in the way the war had been explained and justified by, one president after another, as this, mission to save a small country against aggressive communism, so that they could develop a country and a government of their own choosing, and democracy would flourish. Once arriving in Vietnam, it was clear that we really weren't protecting the villagers of South Vietnam from aggression, that we were doing as much harm as good, and that we really weren't defending a democracy. They understood that the government in South Vietnam was a kind of police state and didn't have broad support of the population in the countryside. Had they had that real political legitimacy, the war might have turned out very differently.
It was just like our Civil War, basically. There was brothers fighting brothers, cousins fighting, uncles, and, they were fighting each other, the North and the South. People don't realize that.
When over there was thought of, I would try to do something good, but the time I left, I wasn't sure we even should have been there. So,
I never ran into any other South Vietnamese that, number one, impressed me as being patriotic, or number two, really cared about saving their own country.
And I remember going into town, going into Saigon on Pass, and seeing all these young Vietnamese guys on their motorcycles with their girlfriends on back in civilian clothes. And I'm scratching my head saying, wait a minute, yesterday I was out in the boonies, people trying to kill me, and here's these guys riding around on motorcycles partying. Something's wrong. Who's supposed to be fighting this war, me or them?
They gave us these books to understand what some of the things they were saying. But quite frankly, we never had time to learn any of it.
My opinion of the South Vietnamese, they weren't committed. The North Vietnamese were, and we were there fighting for the South. And, I had a hard time with the South Vietnamese when you'd see them, lollygagging around and, not fighting their own war for themselves. So
they weren't a very efficient fighting force. A couple times we'd get in a firefight, and they'd be the first one to back off.
Just didn't feel like they give a shit about whether you was there or not. Maybe when I first went over there, I didn't think that, but when I left, that's the way I felt.
The bases I was on, there was a lot of South Vietnamese civilians that worked on the bases. They may be garbage haulers, they may work in the mess halls, they were barbers, they were tailors, whatever.
They had them on the flight line at the wash rink to wash the trucks and the aircrafts and everything.
You didn't know who was the good guy during the day and who turned out to be the bad guy at night.
There was always that fear because, face it, you couldn't look at them and tell, okay, you're a VC and you're not, So, yeah.
Some of them spoke English fairly well, and you could
you could get a communication going. And especially with the kids. The kids were always fun. But, you know, a lot of times you wasn't sure, especially then, you wasn't sure if you could trust the kids, even the ones that they were letting into your battalion area, you thought. And, you know, you always heard rumors.
We were all on guard duty. Heard some rustling down on the fence. Of course, you had infrared scopes on your rifles, and you could see people. There was 4 or 5 people down there, and of course, the other guy that was with me had to call somebody to see if we engage them or not. But we never got any answer, so we started shooting. And the Army sent a squad out to bring them back up the next day. One of them looked just like the guy that cut my hair the day before. You couldn't tell one from the other most of the time.
The infrared back there was kind of archaic. It was like a television screen on the 90, and we had binoculars, and we could watch it. And we took turns and rotated, and we'd had about 6 to 8 tanks around this perimeter. It was like Cowboys and Indians. The command track was always in the middle and set up for radio watch, and always it maintained the watch every hour on the hour, radio check each tank to make sure everybody's awake, everybody's on there doing their jobs up. And he starts kicking down at us and waking us up. And he said, look at this. And we get up, and he said, look. And he said, so we look out there, and we didn't see anything. He said, no, keep looking. And so we kept looking out there, and all of a sudden, there comes a little head popping out. They let it pop in. And this gook could come out a little further. Then he went back in. And then they came back out again. There were more of them. And they were, crawling out. We let them come out a little bit more distance. But in, a couple of tanks, we were lined up right dead center on them. And so we let them come out about halfway from the jungle to our fire line. They were about midway. The captain gave the command, lock and load one round of canister. And then we hit that, put that round in, picked it up, and they heard it clinking around, and their heads kind of popped up, and they looked around, and they heard that breech block click. All that stuff was going on. They were trying to get back to the wood line, and the command fire was given, and all 3 went at the same time. Boom. And then when it all settled, there was nothing there, man. Nothing.
We sent out ambush patrols every night. So did every company over there. We sent out 7 guys one night on the ambush. This other battalion, they sent out an ambush. Not coordinating with each other. One ambush, they hear a noise in the night. They call in an artillery attack where they hear the noise at. The next morning, I had to go out with ponchos and pick up a boot with a foot in it, a shirt with an arm in it. I had to carry them 7 guys.
As a radio operator, I was attached out to all different companies, different units. When I'd finish one, I'd go back to headquarters and they would send me out somewhere else. We got hit with 105 howitzers. It seemed to me that they were that big. They were huge. Anyway, there was about 4 of us sitting around this one foxhole, and I was the last one in. And when I got in, I just jumped and landed. I mean, it was just like a boulder, landing on these other 3 guys, and they started hollering at me. They knew I was the last one in. And then after that was all over with, I walked back to my comm chief. One of my other friends picked him up, and his back, it just sliced him in 2, the howitzers did. And I thought to myself, I asked God to take an arm, take a leg, do whatever you want, but just let me live. It's amazing the power to live. regardless of anything else. I didn't care if I lost a leg or an arm or whatever. I just didn't want to die.
The guy that was replacing me, John Rykowski from Pennsylvania, was a radio operator, and he was going out on patrol. I went up and told the company CEO, I said, what's going on? What's this patrol? I said, you're sending Rykowski out too? And he said, yeah. He says, he's been in the Corps long enough to know what he's doing. I said, yes, sir. I said, but it's always been a policy of recon here that they have so many patrols under their belt before they go. For 2 days, we didn't hear from them. We decided to get a group of recon out, go look for them, because we had no radio contact. But we was out there for 5 days of the 7 I had left, and we never found his body. He got killed that first night. They had set in on a 360 perimeter on the ridge, 2 on each side. Rykowski and the corpsman were watching a trail below them. Out walks 6 North Vietnamese on this trail, and Rykowski's sitting there, and he sees him, but the corpsman don't. So he picks up a rock that's there beside him and tries to throw it over and warn the corpsman. And when he made that move to throw that rock to warn the corpsman, they saw him and opened up on him and killed him. When we got there, the body was no longer there. So he's one of the MIAs from Vietnam. And that's one of the things that bugs the crap out of me about Vietnam, never getting his body back.
Before I left Vietnam, I was every place from that battalion area in Da Nang all the way up to Con Tien on the DMZ, which was the most desolate place I'd ever seen in my life. When I got to Con Tien, it was like, this is death warmed over. It was not some place I wanted to stay, and I didn't have to stay. I never went there and was there overnight. I didn't want to be there overnight. They all lived in holes. They were in bunkers because they got shelled a lot and everything. And all the foliage was dead. Agent Orange had killed everything.
For one Decatur Marine, Con Tien defined their tour of duty.
It was a rough time to be in Con Tien at that time, and that so they would come in and just say, okay, you've been promoted to corporal. You've been promoted to sergeant. So it was a promotion, but it was because we just lost 3 guys and there was only 5 of us left, so someone's got to be it. The day before we was on the patrol, got there and came back. And of course there was a hill. There's always a hill in Vietnam, believe me, there's always a hill. And that next day, which was Thanksgiving Day, we thought we was going to have the day off because they were shipping in by helicopter them big square things with our Thanksgiving dinner. Going to have some turkey and mashed potatoes. And this lieutenant wanted to go out for a patrol. I said, great. And our squad got chosen to go with him. And we went on the patrol. When I was going down the trail, I was kind of looking at the side brushes, figuring that they had something tied to the weeds or something. I wasn't looking too much on the ground. Well, then a breeze came by with you're walking, and I seen this real thin wire. Okay, and you're walking, and you see it. Like you see your eyes work faster than your brain or whatever. Well, it's true because I seen it. My brain knew it, but I couldn't tell my foot to stop. But it looked like it was in slow motion. And then, of course, when you hit the tripwire, I kind of flew up and stuff. But that was always. I'll never forget that because it was just like you see on TV sometimes when you're supposed to see it. They show you the tripwire on the guy's foot. Well, the right foot was pretty well pulverized. The left leg had a lot of shrapnel in it and stuff. And on the USS Repose, they did a lot of surgeries, and I had my left foot, okay, and I had lost my right foot about calf high. And then as things happened, I ended up losing my left foot because the blood wasn't getting to it and all that kind of stuff. So I had both knees at that time. Well, I was on the USS Repose, and I was kind of like in a coma. You're not in a coma, but they got you drugged. You don't wake up, you don't drink, But every once in a while, your eyes would, do one of them. And all of a sudden, I started yelling for the nurse because I heard something. And, of course, I yelled corpsman, not nurse. But he came running, and because I hadn't said anything in a day and a half or 2 days, I said, I smell something. Well, he smelled it too, and it was gas gangrene. Rank, nasty, yuck. Kind of like vomit with a phosphorus odor, something like that. It was nasty. Yeah, I won't forget that smell. I won't forget the smell of blood where someone, like when you're on patrol and they've had a battle and there's a lot of blood on the ground, it starts drying. I'll never forget that smell either.
People were, burning flags and crosses and their draft cards and whatever.
My sister sent me articles from here, and I said, those gentlemen, I says, we are laying ourselves on the line, and they are back home and telling us what a bad person we are. It pissed me off. And I said, there is a way to protest, not burning everything, not fighting everybody, and that's what precipitated my response.
I can only remember one guy in our outfit that was he was a wuss anyway, but.
I don't even remember it coming up.
No.
We were just there.
You just had to do, and from the guys, all the different guys, because I never was around much of the same ones very often. They were there to do a job, and that was it, and you had to be there. There was no point in
and you weren't
bitching or
going no
complaining.
place, that's for damn sure.
Yeah. I don't remember ever talking about war protesters. I didn't, until I got home, I didn't realize I was having a war protest, so.
It was very discouraging when so many people back home seemed to be fighting what we were trying to do. I remember the feeling, why are we here if everybody doesn't want us here?
So we probably do our tour over here, come home alive, and when the protesters will probably run us over.
We were bused up to LAX for flight home. And at LAX it was pretty miserable. Of course, we were still in our uniforms, and we got a lot of invectives there.
I'm over in Vietnam at the time when the miniskirt come in. So I'm not used to seeing gals in miniskirts. When I left, my wife and all the ladies were wearing them about knee high or a little below the knee. Of course, here's two gals coming at me, and they got a miniskirt on. I'm thinking, gee, and they're looking at me and smiling. Here I'm carrying a duffel bag, my hat on, my dress greens, and they're smiling. I'm walking towards them, and one walks up, and she's just almost touching my nose. And I'm thinking, what's this going to be, And about then she spit on me, said, you baby killer, you, and went on. They both laughed and went on. I thought, good grief, And from then on, I said, I'd never talk about Vietnam.